that is looking at and focusing on Senate Bill 310. What is Senate Bill 310? How can it be a helpful tool for tribes and advancing cultural fire, and all the ins and outs of this exciting new law, exciting new tool in the toolkit. So looking forward to getting into it with you all. But for the packets that you picked up at the registration table, we have a couple key documents that I wanted to highlight for you all. The first one is the Wildfire Task Force Beneficial Fire, California Strategic Plan for Expanding the Use of Beneficial Fire. This is the executive summary. It's a much longer document, but you can find it online. But we want to make sure you have that as a helpful information background to support you all and conversations tomorrow. The other key document that's in your packet is the language of Senate Bill 310. I think there's some real power in seeing the actual text of the law to understand how it can be a helpful tool in your space. And the last one, I hope you all have it. Did you get the template?
Yes.
No.
Okay, we have a template agreement for SB 310. It looks like we didn't print it, so we're going to get that printed real quick and get that over here to you all. But a huge appreciation and thank you to the Karuk tribe for your all's leadership and thoughtfulness around not only SB 310 as the law and being the sponsoring tribe for this legislation, but also your partnership and your collaboration and thinking about what does this new law look like on the page? How do we write these agreements? And being so helpful in thinking about how do we create a template for other tribes to be able to use and learn from in their SB 310 agreements as well. So just a huge thank you for the Karuk tribe and Bill, Sara, Colleen, for your all's leadership and work on this. And then I just wanted to say also a huge thank you to CAL FIRE and my colleagues here at CNRA, who also put in so much thoughtfulness around the implementation of SB 310 and the landmark agreement with the Tripp tribe and CNRA. And then last but not least, Cal EPA and Sabine Talaugon, who's our Deputy Secretary there at Cal EPA, for your partnership in thinking through cultural fire and the broader landscape and how SB 310 can be a helpful resource there as well. So I'm excited to get into the details of SB 310 with you all. And so our panelists here today, we have Department Director Bill Tripp, who is the Director of the Karuk Tribe's Natural Resources Department. We also have Sara Clark, who is a partner at Shute, Mihaly, and Weinberger. And we have Deputy Secretary for Intergovernmental Relations, Sabine Talaugon from Cal EPA. We have CAL FIRE's Chief Deputy Director, Anale Burley. Thank you so much for being here. And last but definitely not least, Heather Leslie, who serves as the California Natural Resources Agency's Assistant General Counsel, is the person who's constantly saving me and constantly supporting me in all the work that we're doing as we try to rethink how we do business here at agency. So Heather, thank you for always being there. I love coming to your office and be like, I have this problem, what do you think? So thank you. And so we're going to get into the details of SB 310. And maybe I'll hand it off to you first. Bill, why did the Karuk tribe decide to sponsor SB 310? And how is this legislation advancing the tribe's goals in the cultural fire space? And what does this agreement mean for you and for the tribe?
Well, that's quite a few questions. But we worked a lot with the coalition of folks to try to work on fire resiliency policy in California and beyond, and we ended up with things like the prescribed fire cultural burning claims fund, and we ended up with SB 332. 8642 was all part of that big resilience package that got more support than any legislative package in California history. And it was really, really exciting to see that happen. But what ultimately came to when we started talking about the access to the prescribed fire and cultural burning claims fund under those laws, we kind of ended up in a situation where we were being denied access to the claims fund unless we agreed to not go by the things that we won in SB 332. So it was kind of like a historic injustice in real time occurring, and so we couldn't, we couldn't just I don't know, it just felt like a big one taken away, and so we kind of had to keep focusing on resolving that. And ultimately, it came down to the opinion of one individual that thought the state should take on liability if they weren't approving the permitting process or a burn plan or something, And so I did end up going into a couple more years of in-depth, relationship building and education, and just hard truths back and forth. To build understanding, and so that's what ended up culminating in SB 310. So the SB 310 basically was to be able to follow the original intent of SB 332 and provide access to the claims fund. And I heard this morning a whole bunch of words, mentioned, like having to ask permission and all of those. Those were the root of the entire conversation from the beginning. The Karuk tribe has never asked for permission from anyone to burn. And but we've started burning, a few decades ago. But where there were permits required, we just partnered with NGOs that are chartered under state laws, and they got the permits. And so we didn't have to make anyone feel like they weren't doing their job or someone was breaking the law, but we didn't have to cede our sovereignty either. And so it took a long road to get there. And so that's what kind of SB 310 means to us. It allows us to continue down the pathway of using fire and expanding it back across the broader landscape and protecting our folks that have been holding on to these practices from prosecution. I hear a lot of folks say this only applies to the SRA, it only applies to, private lands, this, that, and other thing. But, we have had Department of Justice having conversations about deferring to state law around things like claims fund and other things like that. The federal government has deferred to state laws on other issues. And so what it kind of creates in my mind is it creates a little bit of a circular reference that leads us back to to carrying these things out as an inherent tribal function, under tribal sovereign authority. They say as principle of law that in absence of tribal law, federal law applies, and in absence of federal law, state law applies. And so if you've got situation where you don't have a tribal law on it and there's no federal law on it, but the state law says it's arson, you got to address the state law first. And so then the state law gives the process to divert a tribal law, which you can have be created, and there is nothing in federal law that says anything about cultural burning. And so there is a good chance that this could ultimately end up applying to all lands. And within the territorial scale as the law sets ancestral territory. So So yeah, it's really exciting, and I mean, we didn't really jump into this particular bill to address any major problems with relationships with air districts. We haven't really had a lot of issues with air districts. In the past, the Siskiyou County Air Pollution Control District just deferred to North Coast in working with us, and North Coast has just generally said, well, we don't require permits for indigenous burns. And so, yeah, it's, we do still plan on having that conversation and figuring out how to get an agreement in place. But having this SB 310 agreement signed has enabled us to get out there and burn almost 50 acres over the last month and a half or so, with 3 people. And,
You've already been burning under the agreement.
well, we didn't necessarily apply for the claim because it was really, but we want to get the agreement in place with the air districts first and do that, or at least do that in the student letter that's coming out. But at this point, we're done because everything's reproducing. So we'll start back up in June.
That is so awesome that the agreement is already getting fire on the ground. And congratulations. I hope that feels good. I'm just hearing this now, so I'm not having all my feelings about it, but I think that's very exciting. And I think that just shows kind of like what the power of problem solving together can bring about. And sometimes, yeah, the law needs to change to make that happen. And I think that is some of the really amazing leadership that California Native American tribes bring to that table, right? And can understand on a very kind of intergovernmental level how things are working and not working, and then navigate those processes. And so I just want to say a huge thank you, Bill, to everything that you've been doing to advance cultural fire, not only in the Karuk territory, but also educating folks about the importance of it. I know you put in countless hours into that education, so thank you. And thank you for continuing to educate us here today. And so I think the next part of the panel, I'm going to hand it off to the attorneys to walk us through what is this law? What is it doing? And why is it so cool? If you all want to indulge me for a second, I really love this first kind of piece of it, because from a personal level, just as a Native person, hearing a non-tribal legislative body use these words, especially in the state of California, just felt so validating and so cool. So if you all indulge me, I'll read it, because it just shows how cool California is. So the legislature acknowledges that federally recognized California Native American tribes have inherent sovereignty and authority to regulate their members and cultural practices, including but not limited to cultural fire practitioners and cultural burning. This is a non-tribal entity, fully acknowledging tribes having that inherent sovereignty and the authority to regulate not only their members, but their cultural practices. And I think this is a really cool moment that the legislature took, and a really cool moment that I hope we can continue to see in future bills and in future work, thinking about how do we address those historical wrongs and really acknowledge tribal sovereignty throughout our system of governance. So just again, thank you for your all's leadership in making that happen. And I think another key component of this legislation is that the legislature clearly articulates that we need cultural fire to meet our fuel management and our wildfire resiliency goals. It is a necessary component for us to care and steward our lands, our forests, for the health and well-being of not only Native communities that deserve to have these cultural practices, return back to their communities, but also for all Californians. And so hopefully that's kind of a hopeful start on for our attorneys here on the panel. But maybe Sara, I hand it off to you first. What would you highlight out of this new law? And what do you think the tribes joining us here today or watching this recording later should be aware of in this new legislation?
Thanks, Geneva. So I wanted to start off by just noting that these laws are really complicated. And I want to apologize for that because it was not our intent. When we started this process, we were working on some ideas that really would have looked more like what Dawn articulated earlier, which is just go out and do what you want to do, and the state will leave you alone. But that's not the system that we live in. That's where we started, and what you see in this panoply of different laws and the complexities with which they interact is where we ended up, and that's because we work in a system that has multiple players with multiple different interests at heart, and so this is the work of compromise and negotiation, much compromise and negotiation. And so I'm going to try and simplify, but it's hard. I also wanted to note really where Geneva started, that language that she read. When Bill and I were first talking about this bill, we thought to ourselves, what if it was just that? Like that alone would be an amazing statement to have in state law. And I'm really grateful to Geneva and her team for we had language that was a little bit narrower to begin with, and they encouraged us to think a little bit more broadly and to have this statement about tribal sovereignty that for the first time, the state legislature is really codifying that in a meaningful way. And I think that is quite meaningful and gives us room to continue to expand what that means from a permitting and regulatory process. So what does SB 310 do? What can tribes do with it in order to help get more good fire on the ground? I really want to focus on what Chairman Ruiz brought up earlier and what Bill talked about. This is really focusing on that permission piece. So for a lot of tribes, the permission structure, having to go to CAL FIRE, fire district or air district and seek permission to do and engage in a cultural practice feels very uncomfortable. And so what we were looking for was a mechanism to enable tribes to be able to put that fire back on the ground without having to first go to an entity that has subjugated them for hundreds of years and say, hey, can you tell me how I should do this cultural practice? And so we were really looking for a system that could remove that permission, that regulatory structure from the process of cultural fire. So SB 310 then works in a couple of different spaces. So I want to be really clear that the reason why a tribe should pursue an SB 310 agreement is because they want to forego a couple of different things. One is seeking burn permits. So the process of seeking permission from CAL FIRE to burn. Number two is seeking air quality permits from local air regulators. And number three is applying to the claims fund in a way that requires CAL FIRE to approve a burn plan. So those are the three kind of goodies you can get from an SB 310 agreement. It is a process that eliminates the need to go through the permitting and regulatory process for those three things. It doesn't do anything more than that. So I want to be really clear that those are the aspects of 310 that a tribe should really be evaluating. Do I want to have a system wherein I am not doing those things? If so, then SB 310 agreements are their pathway to do that. But for tribes and cultural fire practitioners that are either fine getting the permits because that's the system that they've developed and they might have those relationships, we don't want to dictate how tribes choose to engage in cultural fire. If permitting feels like something that's acceptable, then that's fine. You can continue to use that process. Likewise, and I think it's been alluded to, we know that there are tribes and cultural fire practitioners that accept the risk of burning without state permission. And that's fine too. There's a risk associated with that. But again, we're not here to dictate how people engage with that. I'm not a representative of the state. I recognize that other people on this panel might say, you need to get that permit, but that's for them to say. So if a tribe wants to engage in this process, then what happens? How do they go about doing it? And I want to be really clear that SB 310 does not apply automatically. The original draft of it that we had would have, but that's, as I said, this is the compromise. This is not where we got. First, it requires an agreement, and it might actually require 2 or 3 agreements. One is going to be with CNRA, and that is the one that covers both the burn permit part and the burn plan under the Plains Fund part. The second is an agreement with 1 or more local air districts, and that covers the air quality permitting part. So in order for SB 310 to apply, you must first have an agreement in place. If you don't have the agreement in place, this law has some really nice language, but it does nothing else. And so that agreement is really critical. The second part that I want to highlight is that it also requires a second step that the tribe must engage in, and that is the designation of cultural fire practitioners. And I'll say that we at Karuk have been really engaged in that process and trying to figure out from a tribal law perspective, what does that look like? What does it mean to designate a cultural fire practitioner? Which mechanisms under tribal law should we use? And I want to highlight that in SB 310, it really recognizes that both the entering of the agreement and the designation of cultural fire practitioners are sovereign processes, and the tribe can choose to do them however the tribe wants to. The state doesn't dictate what that looks like. It doesn't dictate what the ordinance or resolution or other mechanism under tribal law has to be. That's for the tribe to decide, and the state defers to that. So I'll leave it there. I know there's a lot of complexity, as I mentioned up top. Happy to get into, but hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity on what this law does.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate you walking us through that. And yes, please, if this is an agreement that your tribe is interested in, don't hesitate to reach out and know that we're excited about that and would love to continue those conversations and also help navigate the complexities, right? I think it's okay to be eyes wide open. It's still a complex process.
Can I say one more quick thing, which is just that Karuk entered into the first CNRA agreement, and despite the complexity of the overall legal structure, I want to say that the CNRA agreement is delightfully simple. And so when you get to see that template, hopefully it does not feel overwhelming for tribes that want to engage in it. I think any person can read it and understand what it means. We really tried for it to be something that's accessible and lays out what the process is. So we tried at the end.
Yes, and if you don't mind me quoting it, delightfully simple. Also, you hear a lot from the state government. So thank you. Chuck, you had a question. Yes, yeah, definitely. And so, and we're happy to navigate any complexities regarding the coastal zone, but yes. All right, so now I'd love to hand it off to you, Heather. Anything to add or anything you wanted to highlight specifically under SB 310, but also if you could provide some context of what a tribal leader should expect after sending, me an email saying, hey, I want an SB 310 agreement for my community. What should they expect that next step?
Yeah, thank you so much, Geneva. I'm glad that the agreement is simple because I think I should be speaking the least out of anyone up here. No one has ever said, I really want to hear more from the state attorneys. So recognizing that as much as I love working with the Karuk tribe on all of this, I don't think I need to be playing a big role here, right? This is not a contract with the state where we need to go through line by line and negotiate and go back and forth on terms. I'm not here for that. No one has an interest in me being involved in this at all. I mean, hopefully I'm involved as little as possible, right? I'm happy to help. And the attorneys at CNRA are happy to help with that. But really, we need to be out of this space. This is not where you need an attorney. And we recognize that. And so apologies for even having to speak to you and be part of this. You don't need me. I hear that. I will say in the terms of thinking about the agreement, the only thing that really stands out in my mind as a place where we, as the state, really need to listen and hear and invite you to make changes that are different from sort of a standard template. Maybe there are a couple areas, but the one that really stands out to me is the notification. And thank you to the Karuk tribe for teaching me about notifications, and that it really is different depending on locale. And there are places where folks cannot use cell service to call CAL FIRE and say, this is when the burn is happening, or we've started a burn right now, or that there might be burn bosses or cultural fire practitioners who aren't available on the weekends to provide that notice. And so certain timeframes aren't going to be appropriate, because if you're burning on a Sunday and we expect you to provide notification on Saturday, that's completely unreasonable. And so that's where I really hope that you tribes feel enabled to come and tell us what works and how to make it something effective on the ground. Because the one thing I did hear from speaking with CAL FIRE, and that now is my worst nightmare of what this could be, is that we have a giant helicopter come and put out a cultural burn. And as great as all the technology in the world is, you know, we have the ability for cameras to spot fires before we get those 911 calls now. We don't need that to lead to a deployment of fire suppression. And so when thinking about the notification piece, I just want to express that that's where I'm coming from. I just don't want to cause more problems. And so the notification piece isn't about permission. It is about making sure we as the state don't screw things up further, quite frankly. That's my perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. I really appreciate it. And yeah, and I think you're kind of hitting on to the point where it's like, I hope you are hearing from CNRA and CAL FIRE, there is a lot of drive and support that we want to see more cultural fire on the ground, and that also be eyes wide open that every area is a little different. And every tribe has different priorities and laws in place. And so it's going to have to be a conversation to flush these out a bit more, and know that we're here for that. And we want to have those conversations and make these agreements tailored to help advance your tribe's priorities in the space. And there we most definitely need to. So, so thank you for always being here and bringing your creative thinking hat on all of this. And so maybe we can then hand it off to Chief Burley. And CAL FIRE has been a integral part in the discussions and development of the Karuk and CNRA SB 310 burn agreement. And could you provide us some more guidance and insight on how you see CAL FIRE's role in future SB 310 conversations, and also your all's role in future partnerships for cultural fire, not only with federally recognized tribes, but also not federally recognized tribes?
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And thank you to all the tribes and our tribal partners for everything that you are teaching us in this space. And it has been very apparent throughout the last many, many years that we have a lot to learn from the California Fire Service, from the fire service in general, on how do we get more beneficial fire onto the landscape. And this is something that all of you know very well. And we are leaning on all of you to help us be better in this space and be better educated in how we can do this, how we can make our lands healthier, how we can help to mitigate some of these catastrophic fires, and how we can better partner or be a better partner. And don't worry, I've taken already tons of notes today on the things that I'm hearing from all of you on, and I'm looking forward to the next hour as well as how we can work better together and be better partners. And thank you to Sara and Bill for all of the conversation and education throughout the development of this first agreement. We had some very candid conversations. I made a fool of myself many times in those conversations, just in my own lack of knowledge of some of the experiences that the tribes have, and their needs in order to be successful in this space, and things that in my very black and white world of how I do business did not apply necessarily to this agreement. And I really appreciate you walking me through those and some of the things Heather said. Like in my world, everything is about notification because I do not want to send fire engines or helicopters or airplanes to these fires and unintentionally stop a cultural burn. But I have all these other sources, 911 callers and satellites and cameras that are all telling me there is smoke, there is fire, there is an emergency, we need to put this out. And so how do I balance both of those competing interests, right? I mean, the public, we have trained the public so well in this state that they cannot see, there's nowhere that there's smoke showing in this state that we're not getting hundreds of 911 calls. And so how do I teach my dispatchers, my 911 operators, that you're going to get a call for this smoke, but we are not going to respond resources? How do I tell my firefighters on the ground, you're going to get out there and we're not going to do anything about this fire? And so it's a huge cultural change, to be honest, within our organization, within the fire service, about how do we get better at this and how are we more educated and accepting of cultural burning, and how are we a better partner in building relationships in this state, in this space, excuse me, and in this state. So that is some of the things that, you know, on a very personal level that I have experienced going through this process. And I think Bill and Sara, thank you for walking us through this, because you have definitely paved the way for the next tribe that is interested in having one of these agreements, because I think that a lot of the questions and the concerns that we had going into this, reading this legislation, that we were very nervous about, to be honest. How is this going to work? How are we going to ensure? And the big thing is I don't want to put the tribe, put my responders into a confrontational relationship at any of these cultural burns. And so how are we ensuring that processes are in place in advance so that we never get to that place? And so these are some of the things that we worked through, some of these hard conversations, these honest conversations that we had in the development of this agreement. I can honestly tell you that when I speak to the department now, when Chief Tyler, our director, speaks to the department, how we speak about SB 310 now and what it means and how it's being applied is very different than when this legislation was being developed, because we didn't know what that was going to look like. And now that we have the agreement and we have a better understanding, we have a very different feeling about it and are excited about it and are looking forward to other tribes moving forward with this agreement. We all are in this together, and we need to be putting this fire on the landscape. And we are excited to be learning from all of you and excited to see how we can be better partners in this space.
Well, thank you so much. And I will say that I also learned so much from you, Chief Burley. And I will say that in those conversations, especially around the CNRA code agreement and on this notice piece specifically, knowing the complexities of how both tribal communities and the non-tribal communities view fire and smoke, I think was really helpful and me understanding the fuller picture. And I will never forget something that you shared with me, is that a lot of Californians right now have experienced a lot of immediate trauma, but then also historic trauma, right? And then for California Native American tribes, that's the criminalization and of cultural practices and cultural fire. And for non-tribal communities, especially those that have suffered and been impacted by these catastrophic wildfires, have fire trauma and smoke trauma, right? And so that in of itself is something that we need to think about, be aware of, and try to heal. And you really brought that, I think, to a point for me in a way that I was able to wrap my head around fully. So I just want to say thank you. And I think that was really helpful in our conversations with the Karuk tribe in this agreement of being eyes wide open about where the tribe's capacity is, but then also how does that fit into the broader patchwork. So I'm just so excited that you're in your role and part of the SB 310 team. So well, thank you. And then so for our next panelist, Deputy Secretary Talaugon, thank you for being here and really appreciate you sharing your insights on Cali PA's role in SB 310 and maybe even share a little bit more about what is Cali PA and how does it relate to CARB and the local air districts as well.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Thompson. Hi, everybody. My name is Sabine Slogan, and my main portfolio at Cali PA is tribal and border relations. And I like to acknowledge that because I see it as a way for Cali PA to kind of consolidate somebody who's going to navigate relationships where we are trying to respect sovereignty. We're thinking about the resources, the watersheds, the air basins, and so on, that we both cohabitate. We're thinking about each other's authority to manage those resources. We acknowledge that we don't have control over each other in all the ways that sometimes would feel convenient for some governments. So Cali PA is an agency that has 6 boards, departments, and offices, including the California Air Resources Board, from which Chanel Fletcher was speaking earlier. And we also have, the State Water Board and a bunch of other folks. And the relationship between Cali PA and CARB is really that we are partners, and CARB also works closely with the 35 air districts that work locally. And in these conversations about SB 310, we are, and CARB are also working closely with CAPCOA, which is the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association. And that's a place that, air districts are kind of centralized, and we have opportunity to do outreach and education and so on. Cali PA is mentioned in SB 310 as responsible for helping to address conflicts that arise between tribes and air districts in the development and implementation of agreements. I just want to acknowledge, we don't have an example agreement between that tribe and the air district at this point, but I would love to, support that conversation and work with CARB closely on seeing how that can happen. CARB and CAPCOA have highlighted to us that there are a lot of challenges that all kind of fit within the theme that Chanel was highlighting earlier. We in this room definitely recognize the benefits of good fire. And at the same time, there is some tension with the perceptions of fire in the broader public, and public health and safety concerns, and the responsibilities that CARB and air districts have in ensuring that the state implementation plan is followed, and national ambient air quality standards are followed, and so on. There's a lot to navigate there, but we're ready to help figure out what that's going to look like. Some of that, I think, falls into like what you were talking about of just increasing awareness among staff and helping people understand, because as state agencies, we're responsible for implementing law, and I think sometimes we can discount the art and dynamics that go into how laws can be implemented and the care that can be, created. And we all know that Native people are really invisibilized in this country and especially in California. And so many of my colleagues, like as I've been in state service and working in other policy areas, very well intentioned, but just really don't know what tribal sovereignty is. Really, think that they haven't met a Native person, and then they haven't even gotten to the space of really thinking about traditional knowledge. And thankfully, there are people doing really visible work. There's coverage of Good Fire now, but there's a lot of room to grow, and so I'm talking with Karuk about how can we help increase this internal capacity to navigate these conversations, both among Karuk staff and what can we do to share resources with air districts so that they're ready to navigate. I'm basically trying to be proactive about this responsibility to help address the conflicts by trying to figure out what we can do at the beginning. Additionally, I am hoping that we are able to bear witness, be involved to an appropriate extent in the development of the first agreement between a tribe and an air district so that we can learn best practices process-wise about how to do that in a good way, what gaps can CalEPA help fill. And also acknowledging that, my emphasis is on process when it comes to these best practices, because, every tribe is different, every air district is different, and, we have to accept these complexities. But it's just really important to CalEPA and to Secretary Yana Garcia that the ways in which we implement our regulatory frameworks are conducive to the return of traditional knowledge, the return of traditional people into the roles of stewarding lands, waters, air. We were talking about, beneficial smoke earlier, and I think a lot of people are like, wow, I didn't even think about that. But just like thinking about what that means for the work that we are responsible for, being open to those conversations and being really grateful for the tribes and everyone who is willing to be patient with us to help us get up to speed and do the right thing.
So thank you, Sabine. I really appreciate it. And I will just kind of pull out something that you said that it's like, yeah, we need to do this moment. I love how you articulated we need to bring care into the implementation of our laws. That I think is a beautiful way of articulating how the state can build better partnerships with tribes and really think through, like, it's not just checking boxes and going through whatever the regulations say, but we as folks who are serving, the public and California Native American tribes in this space, right? How do we bring care to that piece? So thank you. And thanks for always bringing care into your role. I really appreciate it. And I think I heard Sabine's down. So send her an email. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So our next question I have is for Director Tripp and Sara on that kind of second kind of piece that Sara you mentioned in the law, where it's like, okay, you have your SB 310 agreement, and the CAL FIRE permits are waived, the CAL FIRE burn plan requirements are waived. Now, what that second piece? What is that internal governance component look like for federally recognized tribes? And this is, again, something that the state doesn't have a role in. But I think for the representatives joining us here today who are representing tribes, it could be a really helpful to hear how the Karuk tribe is thinking about that internal governance. Of course, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. And what are the tips and strategies you would offer to tribes that are joining us here today or listening later to learn from as they think about pursuing an SB 310 agreement with either CNRA or the local air district? And maybe hand it off to you, Director.
Yeah, you know, this is one of the things that we're taking the deep dive into right now. We kind of thought it would be pretty simple to get started, but a lot of times things are hard, can be harder. And so but you know, we you know ramped up our conversations on the home front. Well, now we have the framework and the agreement and the laws in place, and so how are we going to make these determinations? And so you know, we had an idea that we'd probably just start with a resolution. That is technically a tribal legal document, and so that's where we're looking at starting. But in the interim, council approved me to be the first cultural fire practitioner, and so and we're not approving and so
They picked a good first.
so it's been a challenge to try to squeeze all of this in doing all this stuff and things.
We definitely keep you on that speaking circuit.
So I was forward thinking, and I did allow myself to be overbooked in February, March this year in anticipation. But yeah, along with that approval, they gave us 90 days to come up with just an initial framework for how we can comfortably start to designate cultural fire practitioners. We were doing some of this and demonstrating cultural burns before SB 310 was passed, under SB 332. And we were just limiting it kind of to that February, March window when CAL FIRE permits are not otherwise required. And we were keeping them at pretty small scales, sometimes down to even just under one individual tree. So, we're getting into larger scale acreage. And so it's but we were reaching out to people in the community that have been upholding this practice, and we're saying, well, okay, let us know what your experience is. But and then we a couple of us knowing the traditional foundations would be able to just gauge, okay, this person knows, the cultural laws, the traditional laws, the oral transmission through story. It's hard to navigate when a cultural practice like this is founded in oral transmission, and the tribal community believes those stories and those ceremonial principles are tribal law. And then you have a tribal government that has tribal legal structures. And so that's the piece we're kind of trying to, we're probably not going to completely navigate. There's hard questions like, well, our fought to win it is not a person. You know what I mean? It's like that's the embodiment, spirit being performing practice. And so do we incorporate that or do we not? So some of these things are things that we're that are going to be challenging. We're probably not going to deal with in the first 90 days. But with SB 310 and some of these other laws not having a sunset date, we don't foresee going the route of developing an ordinance until there's actually something with some permanence. If that ever happens, there's really no reason to establish a permanent ordinance until such time as we know it's not going to go away. And so that's kind of the approach that we're taking now. Ultimately, when we submit, that initial package, that hopefully by that 90-day mark, we'll see what council's feedback is and go from there.
Let's see. So just to highlight what the law requires, and then to talk about some of the kind of things that we've been thinking about. So the law requires, it's pretty minimal. So first off, the agreement is between the state or local air district and the tribe, but the things, the permits that are sort of in lieu are with people. And so you have to get from the tribal government down to the individual cultural fire practitioner. And that's the piece that's really internal to the tribe. So the tribe enters the agreement, but then needs to come up with a mechanism for designating cultural fire practitioners. The only thing that the law says about this is that the person has to have substantial experience. It doesn't define what substantial means. It doesn't say that it has to be substantial for all circumstances. One of the things that we've been looking at is, substantial experience could be limited to burning in a specific place or a specific season, and that would be fully compliant with the state law. When we went through the SB 310 agreement structure with CNRA, I think the other two aspects of this that really came out that the tribe has had to think about, one is what's the documentation of that process that is available, that the tribe keeps. So looking at what information the tribe develops to say, yes, we have designated this person as a cultural fire practitioner, again, left up to the tribe, but that's a process that needs to be developed. And then secondly, what is the thing that the cultural fire practitioner has that can indicate to anyone they're talking to, whether that's, a CAL FIRE, officer that's out or an air district or whatever, what's the document that person has to say, oh yes, I'm part of this 310 agreement. And so looking at something like a card or a resolution or a piece of paper or a letter, that's another piece of the agreement that the tribe needs to figure out, is what is the documentation they're going to give to the cultural fire practitioner. One other aspect of this that we were really sensitive about in the agreement is confidentiality, and making sure that information about the specific names of cultural fire practitioners is something that's kept with the tribe, unless and until it becomes necessary because there's some issue that needs to be dealt with, whether it's a claim at the claims fund or something like that. And so that CNRA was really receptive to that. And I think that the way that the template agreement talks about this should be hopefully comfortable for most tribes that are engaging in it. So those are the pieces that a tribe needs. I'll mention a couple of the things that we've been working through in the Karuk tribe. One is around liability. As always, what is the liability? Who's responsible? Whose insurance applies? What is the mechanism for designation? Does the liability change if it's a tribal employee versus it's someone that's designated versus resolution, et cetera? There's a lot of complexity there, and that's going to be something that tribes that enter into these agreements really need to think about. And so that's a sticky wicket for a lot of tribes. And I'll say that one of the things that's been really helpful here is that the state has done so much work to try and address liability on the back end. So one of the things that this agreement was intended to do is to have cultural fire practitioners be able to access the claims fund, so they get that $2 million backstop. And then likewise, that they can have access to the gross negligence standard for fire suppression recovery costs. And so those two things, hopefully, with enough education, can help assuage tribal council members and others making decisions that some of the liability questions have been thought through. The other thing that tribes will need to think about is who is doing the designation. Is that something that tribal council is the best set up to do? Is that something for a tribal department to do, where you have a tribal employee that's making that? Is there tribal elders or an elders group or sort of that holder of cultural knowledge that should be the one designating the cultural fire practitioners? How do all of those things work together? So I think that's going to be really unique for each tribe, but it's something that is going to have to be thought through in advance. So there's a lot there. And I think both Bill and I would be happy to talk further with any tribes that are thinking about how to work through those issues.
Well, thank you so much. And I think the folks that are joining us who don't represent tribes, right? I think this is a little insight of what does tribal government look like, right? And just as complex bureaucracies as ours. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about how the Karuk tribe is looking at this, and really appreciative of Counsel's, thoughtfulness and all of this. And Bill, I will know I heard you sunset clause, so yeah, right. So I appreciate that. Yeah, so we are close to time, but I'm wondering if I could just ask the panelists in like a few words, what is your hope for the future of SB 310? Where do you want to be 5, 10, 500 years from now?
I've had some elders force promises out of me.
Elders are good at that.
And yeah, there's one in particular that has a whole lot of my respect and had since I was 8 years old, the year my great grandmother died. And he said, "That's the man you talk to right there." So he's basically been the one since. And he said he made me promise that we would burn Offhill Mountain as part of the world and bring those ceremonies again before he dies. And so that's where I want to be. I hope he lives for another 40 years. You can't count on people having that kind of time. So we are working on projects to restore conditions conducive of ceremonial burning. And we do have the 4 supervisors now saying that they understand that cultural burning might be 1, 10, 5, 10,000, 20,000 acre things. So we're getting there. But yeah, that's where I want to be. I want to be revitalizing the ceremonial practices that have been taken from us.
I would say that I hope when this bill sunsets, we don't renew it in its complex form and instead have had enough piloting of it that we have felt like we can trust this process a little bit more and work to simplify it. So we get something closer to tribes really feeling like they have the space in which to operate cultural burning under tribal law without so much complexity with state and federal government.
Take my hat off, put my Indian hat on. I want to see our young Native people, our children involved in fire practices and learning and confident in their abilities, their relationship to fire. And I want non-Native children to understand that fire is more than something to just be afraid of.
Lovely.
I think I will, 2 things. I think I will build on what Sara said and the fact that I have already seen that this legislation has helped us in becoming more educated about cultural burning, and that I think and believe and trust that this will help us build better relationships across all of our governments in this space as we work to heal our lands and our landscape and our world, and that we all need to be together and doing that.
I selfishly hope that I am not very involved, right? You don't need me. I hope that in 10 years, we have so many agreements rolled out, they're working perfectly, and you never have to hear from me again. That's my hope.
We'll put you on business.
That'd be great.
It's like busy guys.
I love what you're doing. Don't have any input.
Well, please help me in thanking our esteemed panelists here today. We are providing that SB 310